Hi, welcome to the Divorce Couch. My name is Simone and I'm the divorce coach based in Germany.
And hi, my name is Claire. I'm the divorce coach based in Northern Ireland.
Hi, my name is Salma, and I'm a divorce coach based in London, UK.
Today, we would like to talk about communication styles. Could it be that your communication style does not serve you? We would like to take today's episode and discuss what could you possibly do to have a better outcome, and especially when the emotions run very high in a situation like a divorce, with two people being on two different emotionally journeys, it can very quickly escalate. And I think, and while I prepared for this, the thing is, nobody knows the button of the other person better than the one that you are divorcing from. So it can very well be, when we don't see eye to eye, that a message will come in and it will trigger the exact probably point in you while you are separating. And I personally have experience in my support group that if communication is not being done mindfully, it can backfire, because let's assume you just, rant and you happen to do it on an email. You might say something which, when you have a custody case, for example, will go into court, and then you have just portrayed yourself in a not best possible way when you're about to fight for children. Okay. Does anybody, I have also prepared a couple of models here, like communication models, but do you each have, potentially to pick up our viewers, have a situation maybe recently or even in your practice where you say, yeah, it is really important, that is really something we are enabling our clients with to be on the higher route? Any experiences here? Stories. Let's go into story time here.
I think the one thing that comes up for a lot of my clients is um, our expectations versus reality. I think when we find ourselves in,
Huge.
whether it's high conflict or low conflict, there's always going to be conflict during, a divorce. And I think people can find it quite shocking when they see a side to that other person that they probably didn't think that they would ever see, or a side to that. And I often come back to my clients to think, well, is that really true? Did you see that side to that person, but it was just never directed towards you? So I think divorce can bring out some really, ugly sides to people, because, people are hurting at that moment. People are angry. People are feeling rejected, or whatever it is that heightened emotion is. And it can sometimes mar the way in which we would respond in sort of normal circumstances.
Yeah. And I think also communication is one of those things. It's the two-way streak, I suppose, but there's also the in-between of how we respond. And one of my clients was away just recently, and she went away for a few days, and had a day or two in a row, and then was with a friend. And she messaged me on the first morning. So she went the day before, the first full morning of the full day, because she'd had a message from her partner, and it had tailspinned her. She had just spiraled. And she messaged me, and I said, "Are you free for a quick chat?" So I phoned her on our holidays, and within 10 minutes, we had just regrouped, regrounded, and gone, right, okay. And I think one of the things that I, in hindsight, wish I had known the value of was, who do I know who can help me with this when it comes to communicating? Because she was like, what do I say? Do I reply? Do I mention it? She literally tailspinned. It doesn't take very much sometimes to hit the button that we have. So it's about the buttons we have. Nobody can make us feel, react, or say, or do anything. But there are certain things that are slightly more helpful and certain things that are not. And because I am, the external party, I'm not in the middle of the emotions. It was easy for me very quickly to say, well, let's look at this. Have you thought about this? What would happen if you did this? And suddenly she found all of her own answers really quickly. And she messaged me later on that day and said, oh my God, my holiday's not ruined. Thank you. But that's the thing, and I'm in a situation at the moment where there's a few things going on, and I'm like, who do I know who can help me? So before I replied to things, I've actually gone and sought some help by somebody that I didn't know, but I had met her. And she has been invaluable to me in helping me to figure out, what do I do with the feelings I have? Because I just didn't know what would be a good way to move forward. So at that point, I thought, who do I know? And when I've had their input, then what am I going to choose to do? So that's the pressing a pause button in a slightly different way, because I'm pulling somebody else in. And I have a history of overthinking, degree, master's, doctorate level in overthinking. So I go down when I'm replying, well, I need to make it soft reply, I need to make it friendly, I need to make it everything. So by the time I've finished replying to something, I'm exhausted. Because it's kind of been a little bit all over the place. So that's my pattern. So I can recognize that in my clients really quickly. And now I know how I self-talk, and I can talk to them from my experience of how I self-talk now and the difference it makes and where I can get somebody to, because I know where I can get to. So for me, communication is about what we do with what we receive and then how we reply. But do we need something in that middle gap to help us to reply?
Yeah. So then there is the middle gap could be tools potentially. I mean, we have all tools, right? So we can talk about that. I love that you mentioned, what a friend is always a very good place, or no, a very good person to go to. I don't know whether that makes just sense, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To get a second opinion, basically, to rationalize. But I think I just wanted to mention here is, like, we're talking, I mean, like, nowadays in the world that we live in, there's so many different ways that we can communicate. And if we're communicating via text or email, or any kind of WhatsApp or Messenger, etc., then we would very much have that opportunity to press the pause button. But I think there's the other scenario, which is also equally important, is when we're communicating face to face.
You're right. Yes.
Those triggers will still exist.
Of course.
But again, we can use some of the tools that Simone will discuss during this talk about how we can sort of use those in face-to-face communication as well, because at that point we may not necessarily have the time to really stop and think, okay, I need to sort of think about this, but we can build that into our communication. So I just wanted to sort of say that, the tools that we're going to talk about are to cover the different types of communication that are available to us.
Yeah. So just if we just talk about the transaktionsanalyse, right? So basically there's tools. So it's something, and then it would be, it's in the room, and what do I make out of it? So basically, I'm just thinking of, I didn't think about that, but then this in between, what could it be? It could be a coach, it could be a friend, it could be a night, right? So basically, if we just give the night the space to not be in reactive mode, what else could it be? What can you possibly think of? This is interesting. I didn't think that it would unfold this way, just to basically think, what could this in between space be? I know that in an NLP, you anchor yourself, basically, so there comes the impulse and you want to respond, but you can, if you have an anchor on you, then you can just activate it. To have a break.
Well, so I have a client who is in quite an emotionally triggered situation at the moment, and the two of them are living in the same house, and they're trying to navigate sort of separation pathway. And one of the things that she came back to me with a week ago and said that she found the most helpful thing for her was having the phrase, "Let me think about that and come back to you." She used to reply straight away and then think, what have I done? What have I said? What have I agreed to? Because she was so caught in the moment. And she said having that phrase in her head all the time now has made such a difference to how she then goes away, thinks about it. And she said, I may end up saying the same thing that I would have done, but I have felt that I have had more control in the situation. So it kind of buys control. So sometimes that gap in the middle might be a phrase that you can use. So for her, it is, let me think about that and come back to you. And it doesn't matter how long that is, but it's the same idea. But she has responded to the question or the statement or the whatever from the person who's giving it in a reasonable way, and ask for something that is very reasonable so she can walk away and know that she's now bought time. And I love that she articulated to me the difference in her world that has made.
Yeah. I love that.
You're an NLP woman, Salma. How would you very quickly describe this anchoring process?
Oh, thanks for putting me on the spot.
No, I didn't mean
No, I'm just joking. Anchoring, I suppose it's about creating a anchor as such, something, a trigger within yourself to give yourself whatever emotion it is that you feel that you need in that moment in time. I mean, I think for a lot of my clients, one of my clients that I worked with, you know, if she was to receive a text message or even see her phone ringing with her ex-husband's name on there, you know, that would send her into a bit of a sort of a panic attack, a flurry. She didn't even, at that point, she didn't even know what he was going to say. She hadn't even read the text message, but it was the emotional roller coaster that she would sort of start like jumping onto. And I think in those ways, you know, you say, well, how do you want to feel at that moment in time? And that is the emotion that you would try and anchor with clients. So if you know, what they need at that moment in time is to feel a bit calm, or what they need is to feel in control. And that's what I would sort of describe an anchor to be, is that to identify the emotion that they are having, but what emotion do they want to have instead?
Yeah, and with the anchoring, what you would help a client to do is you would take space out and go, tell me a time where you felt really happy, or tell me a time where you felt really peaceful. Where was it? Was it on a beach? Was it in a farm? Was it at home? Was it in a bath? Where was it? So that they bring up the feelings of the emotion that you're trying to capture. And then you would ask them to do something like put their hand on their heart and close their eyes and breathe it in and feel that feeling. So then what the idea would be that going forward, if they got really triggered, the action of putting their hand on their heart when they're starting to think, what is it I'd like to feel? Oh, right, calmness. Oh, because this kind of has anchored it in, this action is something that they can do that a lot of people wouldn't notice. But for them, it brings back the feelings and the emotions and kinesthetically in the body where it is, so that they can shift and change. Because what we think about creates our feelings. So if we can change that and flip it around a bit, it dials down the horrible emotion that they've had when they're being triggered. And just on a side note, something that entered my head when you were talking about that, Salma, another tip for you, our listeners, would be that, as Salma so correctly said, when you get a text message or a phone call or something from an ex-partner and it triggers you, I would suggest maybe changing the name. Change the name to something, anything that you think would be, so that you'll know who it is, but it's not their actual name coming up. Sometimes that makes a difference.
Yeah. I think another, while we're on the subject of NLP, I think a tool that's really sort of I use quite a lot with my clients is actually perceptual positioning, which is, you know, when we are faced with a situation and it can really trigger us and, you know, upset us or make us angry, it's actually to just stop and see the situation from the other person's perspective. Now, that isn't to say that we are justifying the way that they're behaving, or we are sort of validating it or saying that it's right, but actually being able to sometimes see a situation from the other side gives us a different perspective. And it can sometimes allow us to see the situation differently so that we can then respond differently. Because I think sometimes when we are, you know, going through a divorce, we're very much looking at the situation only from our own perspective. You know, we've been hurt, we are angry, we are overwhelmed, and we absolutely are. You know, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that these emotions are not valid, but actually it's sometimes putting ourselves in the other person's position and thinking, okay, what could they be thinking at this moment in time? What is actually their motive? Am I really, you know, the tool, the term they use in NLP is when we are, oh, it slipped my mind, when we're guessing what the other person's thinking.
As in presuming.
Yeah. And to be honest, we can't always guess how the other person is feeling or what they are thinking. We can only assume based on our life experience.
Yeah, there is something based on that. That I'm just looking at my piece of paper. So Bill Eddy, he's my to-go-to guy when it's about conflict in separation, and he has some really good tools, and one of it is called EAR, and EAR is stands for empathy, attention, and respect. So it just is built on what you just said, this conceptual positioning. I can still, where it's kind of like in the same draw, I can still show empathy for what you're saying. I don't have to, you know what, I don't have to go back and, you know what, smash whatever's being said. You know what, I can always use words. I can see that this makes you upset, or I can, you know what, I can still use the words to describe the other person's behavior. And that is so important. This validation is what we are built to have. We want to have connection. So empathy is basically, oh, I can see that you are. So that validates their feeling right there. And then we have the attention. We can bring the attention to what is being said. Not only do we now empathize their emotion, we can pay attention to what they're saying. I can see that you're potentially upset, and let me just clarify, is this what you're saying? So basically, instead of interpreting something into what they might say or what they might have not said, we do this as a coach. It's kind of like, do I understand correctly? Is this what you're saying? So we are giving the other person, again, the attention. And then going back to what you just said, I think we all love to be respected. I respect that you took the time, or I respect, it doesn't necessarily have to be all three, but there's always maybe something small we can say. I respect that, let's say it's about visitation. I respect that you are worried that that the kids don't have enough maybe contact with you, right? I mean, there is always something that we can respect. So it's called an EAR statement.
Yeah.
And,
that is great.
Yeah. So I think it's very smart of him to just put it into this, basically into this three.
I like things that are short and simple and easy to remember. So that works for me.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when we are talking face to face, I suppose, I think it's, you know, important to remember that the words coming out of your mouth are probably a very small percentage of your communication.
Oh, totally.
There's so much more to what we're saying than just, you know, the words. And it's really important to sort of focus, or at least have an awareness of our body language and our tone of voice and the volume that we're speaking in, because all of these things actually make up how we're communicating. And you know, one of the things that I always constantly grew up hearing, because my dad is, you know, bless his little cotton socks, he's quite a verbally aggressive individual, got a heart of gold. But I remember forever my mum always saying, but you see, it's not what you're saying that's wrong, it's how you're saying it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that's something that's always stuck with me throughout my life, because that is the kind of household that I grew up in.
We pick up the vibrations from someone.
Yeah.
So we can pick up whether it's angry or defiant or whatever. And if somebody comes out with something defiant, it means they're not listening. So I love what you said about Bill Eddy, Simone, because what I have experienced and know to be true is that when we learn to respect ourselves, and what does that look like? We invite other people to do the same. So it comes from us. So when I respect how I want, you know, if I thought about how I would like to be spoken to, I can then do that in a way that invites somebody else to match me. Does that make sense?
Makes totally sense. And listening to all three of us, we are already on a level where we are able to communicate. And I think it is very important, especially at the beginning, if you're about to split, there is a time that is so volatile, so fragile. it is really important to decide, do you really need to meet and talk things through? I mean, I think giving other space to maybe then say, this is such a fragile time and things can be really shattered for long term. I think it's very important to say, hey, for the time being, shall we maybe then just communicate through an email channel, for example?
Space and time is such an undervalued resource on a divorce journey. And I mean, and I know that to be true from my own journey, but space and time definitely makes a difference, because you're right, Simone, you know, we get triggered. So why do we purposely put ourselves in a position to be triggered more? In my case, I was always thinking, you know, but it has to be better if we can talk it out face to face, we can cover more ground. But actually, it didn't work like that. So then it became easier to, you know, so the things that we needed, you know, I would text things in my diary, he would text things in his diary, we would, you know, it did become easier. But again, hindsight's wonderful. And that's why as divorce coaches, we bring such a lot to the table, because we pretty much walk just about everything in relation to the different dynamics and the outworkings and the impact and the everything else. And there is that feeling of, can you try it and trust me? And then when you've done it, come back and tell me how you find it. But I think it's worth a try. So, you know.
Yeah.
You know what? And I think, and I didn't have that. I mean, I think, you know what, we also have to give the client, the agency, if they're not ready to do that, at least, you know what, to you viewers, you know what, try it your way. And then if the outcome is not working, it's worth a shot.
Yeah.
To try different.
You've nothing to lose.
Yeah. And I for myself, I think it's also important to highlight that, you know, even with the best intentions of, you know, showing empathy and showing that respect, we still don't have control over how that communication will be received.
No.
And sometimes you may find yourself in a position where you are trying these tools and they're not being received the way that you would expect. Yeah. And that can be quite demoralizing sometimes, because that can send you back into, well, why should I even bother? Right?
You know what? Sorry, you go ahead. And then
I was just, you know, going to say that actually, you know, we can, through consistency, sometimes, you know, I always say to my clients, you know, we want to look at the long-term objective here. Right. Yes, right now, like Claire said, you know, you're both in a very different place emotionally. That may not be received in the way that you want to, because that person may still not want to, you may still be hurting, or they may, you know, not be willing to listen. But actually, especially if there are children in the mix, you know, this is going to be a long-term relationship that you are mapping out in some shape or form. Right. And that's what if we can start focusing on where do we want to be in 1 year's time? Where do we want to be in 2 years' time? So the more conflict we hang on to throughout that period, the harder it's going to be to get to a place where at some point we can speak to each other in some level of civilness.
Yeah. And I mean, what a gift you give your child to see you, how in one of the most stressful phases, you try really hard to remain civil. So basically, before we wrap it up, there is something else, another of Bill Eddy's tools, and I think I probably maybe mentioned that before, it's BIF. So let's assume we're at a level where things are very shaky. It could be because of conflict, it could be because of stress, it could be because we are not ready to see eye to eye and to be able to come to the conversation table. We have decided, okay, we have to communicate in writing. There is something, and which I love. So BIF is basically brief, informative, friendly, and it's not formal. I get this wrong. It's firm, exactly. So the brief and informative one. So what does it mean, informative? Imagine that if you basically something comes into your email box, and it could be something from the lawyer, which sometimes is quite triggering itself, because they sometimes write these stories and then you read it and said, oh my God, I mean, this is really upsetting. So what I love is have highlighters and go whatever comes into your inbox, maybe print it off, take your highlighters, and then let's say anything that you highlight in green, it's the emotions. And then you cross it out, it's green, right? So I don't have to look at anything that is green. You know what, if it is attacking, if it is kind of like trying to demean your thing, just cross it out in green. And that means it's not interesting for you at all. Just ignore it. It's just somebody else is trying to upset you. And then use something in blue. Blue, from where I come from, my school is blues for thinking is for the hat. So basically just mark anything in blue, which is really factual. Basically, let's assume it is something to do with, you have again forgotten to tell me when you are picking up the child. Could be a mom telling the father. So you have forgotten, cross that all out. The only thing that you want to respond to is, when are you picking up the child? Right? It could be a weekend, a handover. And this is what you respond to. So basically, thank you very much. Please be informed that I will pick up the child on Saturday at 2:00. Thank you. Have a friendly, it's firm. It's basically, there's no room for any interpretation. Have a great evening. So these, and even if you receive that with the highlighters, it's not only you do that when you receive it, you do it with your own message. And if you're unsure whether you have, I sometimes tend to use a lot of filling words. You know what, just to make it look friendly, but this is maybe not the time to sound friendly and to write some stories, right? You know,
that's what I was saying. When I overthink, when I'm replying, that's exactly what I do. I pad it out way past what's necessary, and I don't do it now. And it still feels a bit uncomfortable because change takes a while to become comfortable with. But that was something that didn't serve me well and took a lot of energy for me to try and get the words right.
Yeah.
In my head. You know.
Then you have this, do the same. You print it out, and then you again look at it and I said, you know what, is it brief? Is it informative? Is it friendly? And is it firm? And if you feel there is sometimes a word like, oh, I'm sorry, or excuse, this is not the room for that. It's just really something that needs to be decided for now until you're out of it, and you will get to have hopefully a civil conversation while you hand over children, but maybe not now. Yeah. So I love this.
To take the emotion out of the words. And I think that's another important thing that I always say to clients is that when you're putting something in writing and you're sending it across, especially when you're in the middle of your legal wranglings, you know, be very careful about what you are putting into writing
when it's written.
Right, because when it's in writing, then it can be reproduced, as you know, depending on what your circumstances are. So you know, keep your words very factual, like you said. Just need to be informative. You know, we don't want any going back and forth, or last time this happened and you did this, and because again, as what can I say, as inviting as it is to kind of, you know, de-stress ourselves in that, you know, because we want to have that sort of, we want to be able to offload and vent. Actually, what happened last week or what happened last month or while you're married is no longer relevant. We are just looking forward now, and all that will do will just fuel more conflict. So you know, be sure that, you know, anything that you are putting in writing, it's just factual, informative, and it's not going to come back at you at some point in the future.
No tit for tat.
Yeah. And another thing just on that, what you were saying that came to mind that I think is probably worth mentioning at this point is, you know, if you do have a face-to-face meeting with someone and you didn't like what it said or what was brought up or something, a really good idea is to follow that up with an email saying, following our discussion, I'm just highlighting the main points.
Yes.
So that there is something in writing to highlight something that was spoken. If it's upset you and it's important, then if there's no paper trail, there's no evidence that it happened. So following up an actual face-to-face meeting about something, if it's to do with children and overnights or finances or something that's created upset, or somebody has agreed to something and you think that's really good, but it's just there's no witnesses or anything, put it into writing, whether it's a text or an email. And again, use the Bill Eddy form, which is the brief, informal, informative friendly and firm, to just recap and go,
Yeah.
thank you for the communication yesterday. Just to recap, this is what we discussed and this is the outcome, because then it is in writing and you can do that. It's a good idea to do that, because suddenly 5 months down the line or a year down the line, you'll think, I wish I had. So it's the same thing. But the BIFF is on YouTube videos, Simone, isn't it? So people listening could look it up.
It's on his website as well. So
yeah, it's a really, really good resource for people to know about and to use.
Yeah, exactly. And what you just said is kind of like minutes, right? It's in every corporate environment.
Yeah.
You do, you come together, and because you know what, we get, you know what, lost into our tasks, and then we really forgot. I have this at the moment with the people that are in charge of our apartment. I remember that when we arrived, we looked at a basement room, but there were tires in it and I didn't take it, and now I want one for my own tires, and now we kind of got lost because we only talked about it, and now I'm trying to go back to old emails. What did we say? And it's important, you know what, divorce is important. Things are changing. There are some really factual things about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on at that moment in time. So you want to be able to keep track of what's been said, what needs to be done, because I think with all of the like changing, moving parts, it can be really easy to forget or not even forget, because you will remember eventually, but you know, things can just sort of get swept under the carpet.
If somebody said, no, I never said that.
Yes.
What'll happen, the easiest default for that is, well, I think you did, didn't you? I'm not quite sure. So you doubt yourself.
Yep.
So this would stop you doubting yourself.
Yeah.
So it's just these are just helpful things that, you know, really do make a difference to helping to move forward in a process. And if you're able to do these kind of things, it does make a difference. It would have made a difference to me if I'd had a lot of this information back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we are done. I think it was a very beautiful half hour, well spent. I try to wrap up. Think of communication being a back and forth. So there is information coming your way and you perceive it in your very humble, subjective way. And depending on whether it's triggering you into a very emotional, negative emotional outcome or something positive, but we talked about the negative, how do you possibly respond? And Claire said something about creating space. So it's not a tit for tat, right? Say something, you know what, kitchen sinking, Esther Perel says that. So how do you create spaces? You could actually have a phrase that you use and said, you know what, I'll think about it. And then you create space by stepping away. You could potentially have an anchor. Basically, you have, every time you go into a conversation, you have anchored a good feeling that the emotion that you want to be in a good cognitive responsive state. So you've anchored that. I remember, I think I used my earlobe, but then just go back into
there's lots of different things.
Use the earlobe. Then I think, I don't know whether we said that. I mean, one question you always ask yourself is, do I have to respond? Very often there is something, and ask yourself, do I need to respond? Do I need to react? Or, you know what I also loved, and that is kind of like, so basically this is it, kind of like sucks it like a black hole. You just say, noted. Oh, I love that. So basically somebody says, and okay, do I have to respond? No, okay, good, noted, right? You know what, that also.
That's a good closure word, isn't it? I love that.
Yeah, noted. Then I think once you have created that space and you've made sure what channel you want to communicate, whether it is in writing or whether it is on a personal level, ear statement would be one thing, empathy, attention, and respect. Or if you do it in writing, use Bill Eddy's BIF, which is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And those, we hope, are small tools that help you to get out of the rut of when things are really not easy. It's just something that should possibly help you to get through it. So, and we really pray and hope for you that eventually you'll get back to I don't know, to a very friendly exchange. Let's say when you hand the dog over, or your children, and say, how have you been? Nice, thank you. How have you been? Nice, thank you very much. Have a great day. Okay, well, this is basically the objective, and how to get there is, let's try not to get sucked in at the beginning of it. Let's from the get-go try to have the fundament to get to the point, the main objective, to be able to see each other in the eyes again, without having burned the path at the back of your.
Yeah. Well said.
Good. Noted.
Yeah, noted.
Okay, well, thanks for watching. Subscribe, you may comment, and we are looking forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.